now, face to face. I hope the fast, for those of us fasting, is tender and real. Thank you for joining us here in Tribeca and online. Rabbi Dahlia Shacham, who many of us have already met these past, 20 plus hours. He's a dear friend, colleague, teacher, partner in peace work. We're both from the Executive Board of Rabbis for Human Rights. And we've known each other for some time. And it's such an honor that you've been with us this Yom Kippur and on this difficult and complicated day, in this difficult and complicated year. So we wanted to invite you to journey with us into the belly of the beast. The beast being a big fish that is part of our tradition. We just had the privilege of sitting at a quiet teaching and meditation led by Sensei Koshin and Sensei Chodo. Thank you, beloved friends and teachers. In the tent outside, Naomi and part of our Cottage Club leadership is holding the space of bereavement and grief. At 5 o'clock we will be here for our all-faith space with faith leaders as a prayer for justice and peace. This time right now is for us to share with you some of our prayers and songs and thoughts about the story that is part of the Yom Kippur afternoon. The story of Jonah, the man whose name means dove, who's on a mission to escape his mission until he can't anymore. We'll get there. Part of the theme of the story of Jonah is going into the depth, into the deepest denial, the deepest sorrow, the lowest rock bottom from which we can hopefully only rise. So we're going to begin in the depths. The beautiful art you see here on the screen is also by Eitan Kedmi, our artist in residence, one of our artists in residence this year. The beautiful artist who created the mandala with the eye looking at us, eye to eye, and whose artwork is hanging in the hallway. He also drew this beautiful, haunting image of fish eye and Jonah inside the belly of the fish. So we're talking about resilient resistance in the belly of the beast. And we're starting in the depth. You can have the next slide, please.
Adonai, Shema Sighing more than anything else. It's my plea for mercy. Literally, it says "lekol tachanunai," to the voice, to the sound of my plea. V'ye'anachu, the sighing. That's the first sound that the people of Israel made, that God heard when they were down in Egypt. The sighing.
So I'm going to invite Dahlia in a moment to share a little bit personally about you and the family and where you're coming from and how you got to be with us today. I want to say a word about this psalm, Psalm 130. As some of you know, and some of you are joining me daily, several years ago I realized that I have a big hole in my cultural education, and that I've actually not read the Bible cover to cover, and that felt like sort of an omission for a rabbi anyway. And so I took upon myself to be part of the 929 project that my brother began in Israel almost a decade ago. And that is an invitation to read all 929 chapters of the Hebrew Bible day by day. It takes about 3.5 years, Sunday through Thursday, and then you read through the whole Hebrew Bible. I thought, what a great idea. Strangely, I did that during my sabbatical, and I've been keeping at it. Thank you to the folks here who've been encouraging. Michael Dorff, who sends encouraging messages. Rabbi David Klein, who sends erudite comments and suggestions, and many of you who follow. We've been doing this for over 2 years, 2.5 years actually. It'll be done in about a year. And this past Monday was Psalm 130. The Psalms of Ascent, Shirei HaMa'alot. I quoted one of them last night during my sermon. And as I prepared a couple of weeks in advance, and I thought, what is going to be the daily biblical chapter on October 7th? This was the Fates selection from the depths we call. And so, on the day of so much depth and deep sorrow, the invitation was to ascend, to try to ascend. We're bringing it because that was just last week, and we are still in it. And the story of Jonah, that we'll get to in a moment, is a story about a human being who is deep in sorrow, his own sorrow, but also his people's sorrow and the planet's sorrow. As many of you know, I've been traveling back and forth between October and this October. I've been back either 10 or 11 times. Somehow it's not quite clear. And I feel like I always live in split screen and in multiple realities. But this year, even when I'm not there, I'm there. I have at any given time between 10 and 15 nephews and nieces who are in uniform in the reserves, in the south, in the north. All of them have left their children and partners at home for many, many months, not out of any patriotic, national, political stand, but because they are protecting their children. And they are torn as we are. Almost all of my nephews and nieces now in uniform have been actively protesting for democracy for the entire year leading up to October 7th. And some of them, when they're not on the front lines, are in the protests to end the war. That is the craziness that we're living in. And in addition to being there for my mother, who at 95 today has to live through grandchildren and great-grandchildren in peril, in and out of the bomb shelter. I'm there with my friends who are fighting for peace in any way they can, by protesting, by supporting, by volunteering, by standing up to be with the hostages and their families. And I'm there with my Palestinian friends who've not given up in all the ways they can to persist in holding hands with those who believe that we must end the occupation and we have to do what we can do to end this nightmare, and to sign this deal, and to get this evil government out of power, and to try and create a new day. And the truth is that with all of that, as we spoke this morning, the moral decay, the erosion of empathy, the rage that is the product of decades of propaganda and generations of trauma is so toxic and embarrassing that we don't even know how much lower we can go before we begin to ascend. So with all that, we're standing here, sitting here, praying here. And we'll get to Jonah in a moment, but I want to invite you, Dahlia, to share a little bit about who you are and what you are sitting with on this holy, hurting day.
I'm sitting with a lot of gratitude. A lot of gratitude and humility. And with all the tears that I've been shedding throughout this morning and last night, also, a healthy amount of joy. Because I'm super privileged. I live in Haifa, which means that my family has been exposed to sirens and rockets only recently this past year, so I'm very privileged at that. I have a son, and he's 11 years old, so that means that we're not yet at the dilemma of will he be wearing uniform or not, so I'm very privileged at that. And I'm lucky to have good, caring friends, and I'm lucky to be here today. And this past year I felt also very fortunate to have the circles of spiritual activists like me, that to be a part of these circles of people who have hope, of people who consider the world not in like we don't see the lines that divide us into nations or religions as dividing, but really just like a mosaic. And I'm not alone in Israel and in Haifa in this perception that the us and them is not based on ethnic or religious or national definitions, but rather the us is those who seek peace, pray for peace, wish for peace, and the they is those who benefit from war. And it's comforting to know that there is a circle, a broad circle, like good islands of this us, with people with whom I can cry both at what happened to children, soldiers, people that I know on October 7th, and at the same time cry over what's happening in Gaza and in Lebanon. But this past year has felt like like we're islands, and it was this constant work of just like building bridges between those islands to make sure that we stay connected. Yeah. Yeah, one is the Rabbis for Human Rights, this amazing organization that has been around for the last 30 years, even more, doing work for human rights. There is Spirit of the Galilee, which is an assembly of spiritual leaders of all faiths and genders in Haifa, in the area of the Galilee. There is the WhatsApp group that I joined on October 7th in the evening, which is called Keeping Haifa Shared Space, which is a few hundred people in Haifa. I'm very fortunate to have been born in Haifa and raised in Haifa and to be living in Haifa today, because it is a shared city, more so today than it has ever been, at least in my memory of 40-something years. And to be a member of this group of people who are on a daily basis trying to figure out what are the threats to this gentle tapestry of shared existence that is this beautiful city, and just like working together diligently to, part of what we did was arrange volunteers to clean up shelters together, Jews and Arabs in the city of Haifa in mixed neighborhoods. Another was to start a task force of like an open line for Arab citizens who had to deal with racism and threats to their livelihood and freedom. So to try and help that. It's so sad that this is what we're doing, but it's comforting to know that there are people who are available and willing to do this work. And another group that's very, very dear to my heart, I'm not sure how we call it in English. We call it يتصوت متسيوت صنيعات الواقع بالعربي. It means creating reality. It's a team of 6 women. We're 4 of us Jewish and 2 Muslim, and we met through a workshop that is focused on intercultural entrepreneurship, and we started this project of bringing women together to meet out in nature every month and just be together and figure out together what is the reality that we want to create. Yeah, I think these have been like the beacons of hope in my life, like from the belly of the beast, kind of like, towards the light. Yeah.
So let's talk about the belly of the beast. The story of Jonah, and I know many of you know, and I know that our young ones out there in the tents, there's a bunch of people walking with "I'll try" stickers that I think have to do with the kids being charged with the Jonah story, how will I try better? So here's the story in a nutshell, and we're going to focus on one bit of it, and we'll focus on more of it when we meet for the All Faith at 5 p.m. Reader's Digest.
Aziz started last night.
Yes, and
Aziz.
Aziz, for those of you who were with
Our
us
Muslim
last
friend
night,
started it.
yes, Aziz Abu Sara, who considered himself as he told me, a lightly atheist Muslim, doing his beautiful talk right here on stage last night with Mo'ozi Noon, started telling us the Jonah story. I forgot to tell him that he probably doesn't know that it's part of the Yom Kippur liturgy, but I will text him later. The story shows up in the Bible, and it is it's a historically anachronistic tale. It doesn't have a specific historical moment, except it says that one day this guy named Jonah, Jonah ben Amichai, the son of Amichai, whether that's his father or mother, we don't know, or maybe that's a tribe, gets a call that says, wake up, you have a job, please report to Nineveh, the great capital of the Assyrian Empire, and tell them time's up, repent, or game over. The only thing we know about the story that might have any historical context is that Nineveh is the ancient capital of Assyria. And Assyria was the first big empire of the ancient world. Cruel and vicious. We know plenty of testimony about how empires get built. That one was no different. In fact, it set the tone. And it would destroy the kingdom of Israel, where likely Jonah was a member of, as it trampled through the Middle East, building empire. And it killed, more than we know, the 10 lost tribes. That's thanks to the Assyrians. And so Jonah is a minority member of a very small tribe in a big empire, and he's told to go to the big empire and tell them time is up, repent. What any of us will do is hide, deflect, deny, and run away. That's exactly what he does. He runs to Jaffa, the old port town. And there he boards the first ship that he can, going to Tarshish, wherever the heck that is, real or not, might be Spain or Africa. And as soon as he gets on the ship, runs away from his mission, because God on some level belongs on shore. He goes into the belly of the ship, and there he falls asleep. Denial within denial, depth within depth. And there, when he's on the ship, we focused on this in previous years, a storm begins, a big storm. And he's asleep through the storm. And the captain of the ship, whose name we do not know, says to him the immortal words that we will sing later. Ben Adam, ma lecha nirdam. Human being, why are you sleeping? Wake up. The world is a storm. He ends up being dragged on deck. There's a lottery of who will be sacrificed to the gods. And guess who is chosen? And he says, you know what? It's my fault anyway. And they find out that he's a Hebrew. And they're like, okay, I guess we're going to do this. And there's some back and forth. They don't want to do it. He says, do it, do it, do it. It's my fault. They throw him overboard. Game over. Except that's when the fish shows up. So Koshin was just telling us that in the story that I taught last night about the fox in the ruins, the fox has an important role to play. The fox is the trickster in many, many folk tales and mythologies. And so here we have another creature of the earth, a big fish. Maybe a whale. It says big fish. I don't know what our ancient biblical storytellers knew about belugas, but he's swallowed by a big fish. Not fun, but maybe better than drowning. There are so many stories about what happens to him inside the fish, and you might even be familiar with Pinocchio, which is kind of related. But as far as we know, here's what the biblical story tells us. We're going to read a couple of lines and then focus on Jonah's prayer in the belly of the fish, in the middle of this despair that on some levels we are resonating with. Want to read the Hebrew?
וימן אדוני דג גדול לבלוע את יונה. ויהי יונה במעי הדג 3 ימים ו3 לילות.
3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish. Does anybody resonate with 3 days and 3 nights from any other story? Biblical or other? 3 days, 3 nights. Fairy tales? Folk tales? 3 days? The resurrection. From crucifixion to resurrection. Friday to Sunday. Interesting. Okay. What else? It's got to be more than 3 days. I don't know. But I don't know if bringing a cruise liner story into this story is the best move. But thank you. Noted. I will throw in there the story of the binding of Isaac. 3 days it takes from the time Abraham and Isaac leave home and reach the mountain will he be sacrificed. 3 is a mythic story. It's a mythic number. 1, 2, 3. 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish. Imagine. Imagine the stench. Imagine the claustrophobia. Imagine the surprise. Am I dead? What is this? Is it possible? Right? We're clearly in mythology here, not in history. But here's what happens next. Can we have the next slide, please?
ויתפלל יונה אל אדוני אלוהיו ממעי הדגה.
From the belly of the fish, for the first time in the story, Jonah takes action. He isn't reacting, he's acting. In a way that, he ran away and he found the ship and he went to sleep, but here he's praying. And here are the words that the author put in his mouth.
ויאמר קראתי מצרה לי אל אדוני ויענני מבטן שאול שיבעתי שמעת קולי.
As he begins, he's already convinced that he's being listened to, that he's on some level answered. I called out from my distress and God answered me. From the belly of the grave I cried out, you heard my voice. Just want to resonate this notion of being heard, of knowing that I'm not throwing my words into a vacuum, into a vortex. Right? I don't know how many of us this past year cried and wailed and protested and prayed and said, to what purpose? Anybody listening? Anybody care? In this story, there seems to be a purpose. He feels heard. Let's move on.
ותשליכני מצולה בלבב ימים, ונהר יסובבני, כל משבריך וגליך עלי עברו.
You cast me into the deep, in the heart of the seas, and the river surrounded me. All your breakers on your waves passed over me. This one we need to really try and unpack. The translation's weird. Want to say something about this line, Dahlia?
This last line of כל משבריך וגליך, all your breakers and your waves, it's this, I thought I've seen it all, or I think I've seen it all. The word mishbar, mishbarecha, it comes from the root lishaver, to break. So the simple one is like the breakers, the waves that break. But mishbarim is also the word for the moment of giving birth. When a woman gives birth, she's על המשבר, בין המשבריים. So it's like this, it's the breakthrough as well. So it's either all that you had for me, God, or it's either, and this is, me reading this or thinking even this verse this past year, it's like all that I think I can take. There's nothing left that's unbroken.
I want to invite us to just take a few seconds in contemplative space. What does it feel like to you? Where does it meet you? Forget politics for a moment. Just be in the soul. Be in your own life journey. Have you had a moment this past year, this past decade, at any point where you felt like this is rock bottom? Kol mashberecha v'galecha, I am underwater. I am under siege. It feels broken. It feels helpless. Just feel that moment. I cannot help but thinking about Jonah underwater, barely breathing, 1, 2, 3 days in, with no sign that this will ever end. And yes, I'm thinking of there are any living hostages still out there underground, and every single living human ducking for cover.
More than 370 days.
Let's look at the next line. This story is going to have a happy end. Ish.
עפפוני מים עד נפש, תהום יסובבני. סוף חבוש לראשי.
Water surrounds me up to my soul. Now this is a funny translation. The Hebrew word nephesh, that we often translate as soul, in biblical Hebrew, it means throat. So basically, there is water up to my neck. I am up to my neck in water. But the throat, the neck, is how we breathe. My neck is strangled, I can't breathe. There is no soul. There is no breathing. So the Hebrew word nephesh here is there's water up to my neck. My soul is up to here without being able to breathe anymore. I can't breathe. We know where that meets us. The deep, right? And Tehom. Tehom is the great mother. Tehom is Tiamat, the great ancient goddess who has been replaced in the Judaic mythology as the great deep. I am inside the womb, but I'm inside the place which is
Pre-Genesis.
pre-Genesis. And reeds surround my head. I don't know what to make of that. I mean, you want to bring Jesus into it? Okay, there is a thorn crown here, but, right? I'm like, yeah. I don't know. What's this reeds around my head business?
I find some, speak in relation to your sermon last night, like, there is the humor in this. It's like, look at me. I'm this creature. I have like reeds all over my head. I'm turning, all this whole thing is like, afefuni, sovevuni, chavush. It's this like vortex, circular movement of like, I don't know what's where.
I myself am a reed at this point. Yeah, part of nature in some way. Am I a human still? Perhaps I've become a fish. A couple more verses. I think. What's next on our slides? Yeah. So this verse. Will you read us the Hebrew?
ויתעטף עלי נפשי, את אדוני זכרתי. ותבוא אליך תפילתי אל היכל קודשך.
So again, when my soul is wrapped around me, I remember God, and my prayer came to you, to your holy temple. So the talit I wear on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I had it made right after being ordained, and actually Rona Silverbush, who was here earlier and maybe will be back. Hey Rona, remember our whole discussion about that talit? So I took the talit you gave me and I added that, the atara, and it says, Bit'atef alai nafshi et havaya zacharti. When I'm wrapped with my soul, I remember being part of the divinity. Being. I remember being. I remember being. So, but this verse means something else. It isn't being wrapped like a talit. Bit'atef alai nafshi, it's like when my soul is desolate upon me. Maybe not. But I'm praying and I'm imagining that my prayer goes to where you are in the temple. From the belly of the beast, my intention is that I am seen and heard and held in the most utmost. From the deepest place, there is an imagination that I'm not alone. The prayer goes, I think, for one more line before it is answered. And then, yeah, is there one more verse for us to look at? Maybe we're asked to stay, linger in the belly for just another moment. Because you know what happens next. I think it's the only vomit scene in the entire Bible. And the only vomit scene in the entire Bible is a fish.
But I will use this like lingering here because as we were speaking, I remembered one more thing which has been a lifeline to me this past year and still is, which is a partnership with Jonathan Kulda, fellow spoken word artist, poet, musician. We've been going around Israel just enabling people to pray. And many Israelis are secular. They don't necessarily have that practice.
Unlike here. Even though we're God optional.
But still, it's not about God. It's about this sense of just knowing what you do when you're praying. It's not even who you pray to. And for us, for Jonathan and myself and our ensemble of musicians and partners who perform sometimes with Palestinian rappers, constantly praying in Hebrew and Arabic, constantly coming and creating places, sometimes surprising people. Sometimes people who invited us to perform would tell us beforehand, look, but just don't do anything political. And I would say, is singing in Arabic a political thing? And they would cringe, and I would say, then it's political, sorry. Because this Heichal Kodshecha, this tefillah, the ability to just say, really from our own belly, from this vortex of not knowing where we are, the ability to just say something, to sing something, even if it's tzam'an nafshi, I'm thirsty, my soul is thirsty. Enabling people to hear both Hebrew and Arabic in the same room, the same space. Enabling people to mourn, even if they're not official mourners, has been holy and sacred.
An act of resistance.
Act of resistance.
For sure.
And
We
I'm sure
felt
that the acoustics of the belly of the beast was there.
Yeah. There's more to say about Jonah and about the resistance, and we will touch on more of that when we gather at 5 for our All Faith ritual. we want to read together one more text that reflects on Jonah, and that is from Salman Rushdie. And some of you may recall we've looked at that text some years ago. He wrote this back in 1991. The truth is that there is no whale. We live in a world without hiding places. The missiles have made sure of that. However much we may wish to return to the womb, we cannot be unborn. So we are left with a fairly straightforward choice. Either we agree to delude ourselves, to lose ourselves in the fantasy of the great fish, or we can do what all human beings do instinctively when they realize the womb has been lost forever. That is, we can make the very devil of a racket, make a lot of noise. Certainly when we cry partly for the safety we have lost. But we also cry to affirm ourselves, to say, here I am. I matter too. You're going to have to reckon with me. So in place of Jonah's womb, I am recommending the ancient tradition of making as big a fuss, as noisy a complaint about the world as is humanly possible. I think this is Rushdie's response to Jonah's running away, and also what it means to be in the belly of the beast. No, get vomited out there and make a lot of noise, which is what Jonah will do next in his bizarre, heroic journey. Jonah will go to Nineveh, having been thrown up on the beach. And there he'll stand on a soapbox in the middle of the city, which is his enemy's city, the empire. And he will just say 5 words, and that will be enough. The entire city will repent, from king to pauper. Wow. The only successful prophet in the Bible.
I'm quite bitter about it.
And then he gets bitter about it. He's like, really? These a-holes? This empire? Just 5 words and they get spared from their retribution? Fine, you are a God of love and compassion, but what the? Really? And the book basically ends with the divine saying him, yes, I am the God of great compassion, and I have love for humans, and I have love for beasts. The end. And plants, and everything that moves. The story is a story about compassion, but it calls on us to do what Rushdie is doing, to pray from the belly of the beast, and when we can, to cry and to protest, and to raise our voice and not be apathetic, not run away, which is the Jonah game plan, until he is forced to rise to the occasion. We want to share just one more text about the power of tears.
עוד 40 יום וננבא נהפכת. In 40 days, Nineveh would be turned upside down. Small words in English.
40 days to go, folks. Bam. Wow. Right? Have any of us had this? Okay, if I don't get on the treadmill right now, my cardiologist is going to fire me. But more. Right? These shards that Lauren entrusted us with, that are testimonies of our discard of the planet. Yeah, how come that is not what we are fighting for? Why are we stuck on stupid border wars instead of all together working to save the planet? You want to read us the Weitzman, and then we're gonna.
Before I read it, just an explanation of how it got to be here. To make a racket, our tradition, part of our way to make a racket is to blow the shofar. And according to the Talmud, the sound of the shofar is a sound of a cry, particularly the crying of the mother of Sisera from the book of Judges, an ancient enemy of the people of Israel. But still, although he was the enemy, his mother is depicted at her window awaiting his return, wondering why he's being late and crying. And the sages in the Talmud said, what is a shofar supposed to sound like? And they take it from the Aramaic translation that it's supposed to sound like yevava, like a cry. And they say it's supposed to sound like her yevava, like the yevava of a mother awaiting her soldier son to come back, even though he is evil. And they say it could sound like a moan, and it could sound like a howl, but that's the sound of it. And the power of crying has been proven scientifically as a game changer. This research was done about 10 years ago, maybe more, in the Weizmann Institute by a scientist who specializes in the research of scent, of the sense of scent. Like, it's also a sense that is very much connected to Yom Kippur. And he wanted to see what happens if things that don't have an actual scent, if we sniff them, what happens to us. So he worked with tears, and he collected tears and then gave them to people to smell and see what happened. And in the case of humans, the impact of tears on behavior has not been directly assessed, but there is existing evidence indicating that the chemical signals present in tears influence the human body. In Noam Sobel's lab, it was previously discovered that the scent of women's tears reduces testosterone levels in men. It was written by 30 to 50%, a physical response associated with a decrease in aggressive behavior. And last night when I met Maoz, it was the fourth time that I meet him and the third time that I've been listening to his story, and every time I cry, and I told him, that story that you tell about your dream, it makes sense. The tears are there to heal the world. If we cry more, just literally, physically cry more, we can help each other reduce our anger, reduce this sense of I have to act now to fulfill this urge. Maybe that is also what did the works for Jonah. And one more thing, the fact that it's women's tears was not intentional. It's just that the scientists invited people who cry easily watching films, and there were 99 women and one man showed up, and the guy couldn't do it on test. I'm sure that he does cry, but they could only manage to collect tears on demand from women. I came across this research doing my research on spiritual feminism and about this question of how can we turn things around, how can we change things around. And Yonah, the name Yonah means a dove, but in Shir HaShirim, that book of Song of Songs, that topmost creation of our liturgy, Yonah is the beloved feminine. So this is another aspect of this turn of events, and I do feel that this is like the prayer that I might, end this talk with.
So if we can move to our closing poem prayer here, the next slide. I will also say that we talked about the fox, and we talked about the fish, and we're talking about Jonah, whose name also means dove, the dove. The dove in the Song of Songs, and also the dove that flies out of Noah's Ark and comes back with an olive branch, which is why there are olive trees on our stage, and that is why the olive branch is the sign of peace and which is why right now our colleagues with Rabbis for Human Rights are involved with this project of supporting and protecting Palestinian farmers during the olive harvest so they can actually complete the harvest without any attacks from settlers aided by the army. It's actually happening right now. This is the season of the olive harvest. So the dove, Jonah, shows up in the Ark of Noah, flies away to Jonah, and we're actually going to end with another sacred medicine animal, which is the deer, the doe. Ending with this psalm that says, as a doe yearns for water, so my soul cries for you. My soul is thirsty. When will I appear? When will I be here? When will we be over all this?
And the third verse of this psalm is "Hayta li dim'ati lechem yomam v'layla." My tear was my bread. I was nourished by my tears during this journey. I feel that that's true.
And the psalm ends with a quote of Jonah. Unsure who came first. Deep calls to deep, and the roar of the channels, all the breakers, all the waves have swept over me. And so I yearn. And that's what we're doing here now.
אפיקי מים, כנפשי תערוג אליך אלוהים, כאייל תערוג על אפיקי מים, כנפשי תערוג אליך אלוהים. צמאה נפשי נפשי לאלוהים לאל חי, אתה יבוא ואראה פני אלוהים. הייתה לי דמעתי לחם יומם ולילה, ואמור אליי כל היום. הייתה לי דמעתי לחם יומם ולילה, ואמור אליי כל היום. איה אלוהיך, איה אלוהיך, איה נפשי לאלוהים לאל חי, אתה יבוא ואראה פני אלוהים. צמאה נפשי לאלוהים לאל חי, אתה יבוא ואראה פני אלוהים. I feel that this is a taste of Elohim, in this face-to-face, insisting on meeting face-to-face, insisting on seeing the divine within us. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in this belly of this beast on this day. We are on the our flight has begun its descent towards the end of the fast, but the sun is still up in the sky and we're still here. At 5 o'clock in a half hour we will gather here again for our all faith prayer with Sensei Chodo and Sensei Koshin, with Reverend Derek, who's back, with our friend Naz Georges from the Cordoba House, with Rabbi Dahlia, with our ritual team, and with a friend coming in via video from Jerusalem with another perspective on Jonah, a Christian Palestinian take on what the story means to him right now. And so we want to invite you for the next half hour to do what you need, to stay here quietly, to take a little walk, to go face to face with someone or yourself. And we'll gather in a bit for our all faith prayer and then for our Neila. So we wrap this day with all the presence and humility and prayer possible. Thank you, Dahlia. Thank you, friends.